Our idea of privacy has changed in the digital age. Fearful of government tyranny, America's founders designed constraints into the Constitution. Now the tables have turned. Security concerns have prompted the government to engage in a new level of surveillance of the American people and its allies.
This is the truth. This is what's happening. You should decide whether we need to be doing this.
We've been living behind a one-way mirror.
How will we balance privacy and security at home and abroad? The trade-off, privacy in a digital world. Next on Great Decisions. The founding of the United States rests on a principle. Citizens have the right to be free from a tyrannical form of government. But is privacy a right to which all citizens are entitled? While the word privacy does not appear in the Constitution, the U.S. Supreme Court interprets the Fourth Amendment's freedom from unreasonable search and seizure to encompass it.
We deal with a right of privacy older than the Bill of Rights, older than our political parties, older than our school system. Justice William O. Douglas, Griswold v. Connecticut, 1965.
The founders of the country created the Fourth Amendment because they recognized that if the government has too much power to go and take Americans' most private and intimate communications, that power needs to be restrained.
The question of how much privacy an individual is guaranteed versus the government's responsibility to maintain security is now an important debate over our essential freedoms.
It's only been in the last few years that it's been possible for a sophisticated actor like an intelligence agency to actually collect and store and analyze the majority of the world's communications.
Every American got a measure of privacy simply because there were limits on what technology could do to, in effect, invade their privacy. Now, surveillance and invading somebody's privacy is pretty much a piece of cake.
It's a debate that extends beyond American shores. When conducting the affairs of state, the U.S. and its allies around the world believe they are entitled to a degree of privacy.
We have a special relationship with Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Britain, and we generally don't spy on one another. But there have been times in the past in which it would have been a good idea for Britain to have spied on us. They might have caught Ames or Hansen earlier than we did, or for us to spy on Britain. We might have caught the Cambridge Five before they did.
The reality is that vast amounts of information, be it personal, commercial, or the affairs of state, are now digital, and that can make it vulnerable.
Whether you are an individual, a business, or the collectivity of a nation, you are gaining the advantages of being online, but guess what? There are threats coming after you.
It's a wild west out there. You go online and you don't know who's looking at what you're getting, looking at, or how you're using your credit card online and all of that.
Sometimes people say they don't mind that these programs are there, but they have nothing to hide. But to them, I'd say, here's a challenge for you. Let's get a record of every conversation you've ever had, an audio of every phone call you've ever had, all of your emails, photos, and videos. Let's give it to a tabloid newspaper, see what they can do with it.
The U.S. has been rocked by scandals about Washington spying on both citizens and international allies. These incidents have ignited controversy about where to draw the line on surveillance.
What you saw, especially in the allegations that the United States had tapped the leaders of, had tapped foreign leaders, was one of outrage. And especially for nations that are our friends, there was this feeling that, look, if you want to know what we're thinking, just ask us. Don't spy on our phones.
The U.S. is definitely not the worst actor in this space. I worked at the State Department. One of my jobs was to address concerns from other countries about NSA activities. And one of the things I always wanted to say was, look, your government is probably no better than the U.S. on some of this stuff. Maybe the NSA has more capabilities, but to the extent many other governments have capabilities, they're using them in worse ways than the NSA is.
The tech community is furious. They're absolutely furious. It's a very libertarian community to begin with. They've never had much affection for Washington. They never really got it.
For the first time since 9/11, the public is inclined to think that we've gone too far in the balance, that we've given up too much liberty in the quest for security.
Today, it's just the NSA and maybe the Russians and the Chinese that have this level of capability to collect so much. But in the coming years, there'll be a lot more states that can do this.
One of the Internet's most profound impacts is the way it's empowered people to communicate their ideas, good and bad, across the world, freeing information to a degree Gutenberg could never have imagined.
It's not like the media, like the TV, our Egyptian TV or whatever, they are controlling everything. Now there is no control. I just make a capture of any video or picture.
Hardly anyone sends a letter on paper anymore. Very few people even talk on the phone. You see phone call usage going way down. So communication now is reliant on technology in order for it to happen.
No longer are communication systems limited by national boundaries. In effect, you have globally integrated, communications.
Now, just as the White House or 10 Downing Street can use social media to post information about a policy initiative, so too can a militant group use it to brag about a victory or lure and train new recruits.
Just as I tweet out everything from news stories to cool sports clips, we see terrorist groups tweeting out their propaganda and what they see as cool clips that are usually pretty horrific things.
But technology can be used to monitor and track as well.
Technology assists us with fighting terrorism. Primarily, one of the things you see from technology is an increase in targeting, in the ability to identify terrorist networks and pinpoint those people who are going to be problems.
People say, well, why do we let these terrorists go online? Why don't we just shut down all the communication? Why don't we just shut it down? It's a tool for terrorism. It's also a tool for counterterrorism.
The shifting relationship between information, surveillance, and privacy is playing an increasing role in diplomacy. The U.S. government was the target of WikiLeaks, which published hundreds of thousands of pages of secret material about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and confidential memos from the State Department.
The United States strongly condemns the illegal disclosure of classified information.
WikiLeaks was an organization that was founded around the ideal that transparency in anything and everything could make the world a better place. Documents were leaked that showed who was talking to American government officials in authoritarian states, which then put those individuals at risk for either jail or sometimes their lives.
The U.S. government needs to be able to keep some secrets. Otherwise, it can't do its job to actually protect the American people and to advance America's interests around the world.
The value that we got, it has to be counterbalanced to the tens of billions of dollars in revenue that's been lost by American technology companies. They've lost contracts because of these disclosures.
The September 11th attacks on the United States put the debate on privacy versus security in stark relief.
Once that attack happened, it really made people wonder whether we shouldn't give up some of our privacy in order to have more security.
That was a period where, for example, we saw that, the 1% doctrine. If there's only 1% chance of this happening, even then we have to act.
Within weeks, Congress passed the Patriot Act, expanding the government's legal authority to monitor the American people.
It gave law enforcement and the intelligence agencies a lot more power to do a lot of different things.
Section 215 of the Patriot Act has been interpreted by the U.S. government to allow the bulk collection of domestic metadata, especially phone call records.
It allowed the Justice Department to ask for information without a warrant. It allowed wiretaps on certain kinds of people. It expanded the ability of law enforcement to go looking for bad guys.
Then, in 2005, it was revealed that President George W. Bush authorized the National Security Agency, which had limited its work to overseas, to electronically eavesdrop on U.S. citizens. The scandal caused an uproar.
The National Security Agency is playing a crucial part in the war on terror.
But ultimately, little changed in Washington.
President Bush, in the heat of 9/11, just let the NSA and the intelligence communities off the chain.
The first instantiation of the NSA surveillance program under President Bush was reformed significantly because certain federal officials who had to enforce it were not happy with the way the program was running. They thought it was against the law. And so there have been some legal changes.
It was a set of amendments called the FISA Amendments Act of 2008. And there were also amendments to the Patriot Act. Most of the people who voted for those things did not fully understand what they were authorizing because the executive branch then secretly interpreted the law to give itself even more expansive powers.
In 2013, the controversy resurfaced.
In the late winter and early spring of 2013, I and two other journalists were in correspondence with a mysterious source. Didn't say who he or she was, but promised important and frightening revelations about U.S. signal intelligence gathering. By late spring, he revealed his identity to me, and he delivered the first of what would be many, many documents that were taken from the National Security Agency.
Edward Snowden stole hundreds of thousands of documents from the NSA, where he worked for a defense subcontractor.
These programs, together with other intelligence, have protected the U.S. and our allies from terrorist threats across the globe.
I'm no different from anybody else. I don't have special skills. I'm just another guy who sits there day to day in the office, watches what's happening, and goes, this is something that's not our place to decide. The public needs to decide whether these programs and policies are right or wrong.
So he wasn't a spy himself, but he was someone helping to facilitate and work the various technology, including the networks that were bringing together all the different information. He grew disaffected by what he saw as the overreach of this collective information.
Those documents showed that the U.S. government is collecting the telephone metadata of almost every American.
It revealed that literally all Verizon customers have their calling records turned over to the government. And it revealed that the government has had access to certain cables that contain internet traffic.
The documents revealed ongoing U.S. government surveillance of the American people, now under President Barack Obama.
Certainly we knew it was out of control in the Bush years, but what we found out is it's been out of control in the Obama years too.
Internet and phone companies provided authorities with the metadata of Americans who communicated with people overseas.
The debate over the NSA and its limits has centered heavily on the idea of metadata, data about data. So when it comes to telephone calls, it's not the words you say, it's who you called, when, how long you spoke. And the NSA was collecting these call records for substantially every American.
The metadata does help people be able to track terrorists and do take other steps that are useful and important to counter-espionage and to law enforcement. And as long as it doesn't exceed the constitutional limits that have been there since the 1950s, I see no particular reason to have gone through this mishigas that we did about setting up new rules and changes and so forth in places where it was stored.
The government knows, for example, that an individual called a psychiatrist 3 times in 36 hours, once after midnight. That's pretty intimate, private information. And that's why I reject that notion that somehow collecting all those phone records, that kind of innocent judgment that some argued that it was just metadata, is wrong.
American tech companies were not happy being used to spy on their customers.
For the first time, you've seen a coalition of technology companies who are often in competition and don't agree on much, coming out together against government surveillance.
You have to stop and think how extraordinary it is that Google, Yahoo, Facebook, Apple, and others are now taking expensive, extensive, affirmative steps to thwart their own government's intelligence collection.
They're furious because they're going to lose business they believe. They're furious because they think they can do what they do without any government, help or interference.
The international community was outraged by revelations that the U.S. had monitored phone calls made by world leaders. Much of that anger came from Europe, especially from German Chancellor Angela Merkel, whose cell phone had been monitored.
The public revelation of these programs and the subsequent acknowledgement, in some cases by the government, have caused very serious reactions around the world and impacted both our diplomacy and American companies' economic growth in very serious ways.
Governments understand that there is espionage, that people do try to listen in on each other, but when it becomes personal, when you realize that this device in your pocket and this conversation you had last week were collected, there's an emotional reaction to that.
Merkel in particular in Germany was furious. And when you consider she grew up in East Germany, the Stasi and all of that, it's not much of a surprise.
It was pretty stupid to spy on Angela Merkel's cell phone. I don't know what good that would do anyone in national security terms. But the Europeans, after blustering a good deal, found out that they were spying on Americans.
Obviously, the NSA case still remains a setback because it has caused some suspicion. European agencies have also been very active. That has also been revealed. So I think at the end of the day, we should conclude that we need cooperation also when it comes to the exchange of intelligence and information.
Brazil and Germany introduced a United Nations resolution aimed at protecting the rights to privacy for users of the internet and other forms of electronic communication.
We are facing a situation of grave violations of human rights and civil liberties as a result of mass surveillance of personal communications and collection of data.
It won the support of 19 other countries.
There's a lot of pressure at the UN level, at the international level, for a stronger reading of international privacy rights, or at least for a more limited role for surveillance under international law.
You see Brazil, for example, canceling contracts with American defense manufacturers. You see Germany being more standoffish towards the United States.
The relative value of what we gained in some of these more questionable programs was certainly not equal to the hammer blow that it did to our government-to-government relations.
Fearing prosecution, Edward Snowden fled to Hong Kong and then Russia after the leaks were made public.
The government has charged him under the Espionage Act and would like to, prosecute him if he were in the United States. As far as I'm concerned, he's a whistleblower, and even the president has acknowledged the value of the conversation we're having as a result of his disclosures.
I believe they were criminal. I believe they were treasonous. If there were any way that we could obtain personal jurisdiction over him, I think he ought to be tried before a jury of his peers. And since treason is still a capital offense, I believe he should be executed by hanging.
There have been big, big changes because of the information, because of the transparency that was created.
This is a question about which reasonable people can disagree. I am myself a whistleblower. I filed a complaint with the NSA and with the State Department before I left my job, saying that certain NSA practices are unconstitutional. And I chose a different path than Snowden.
We often want to put him into one bucket or the other and say, is he a traitor or is he a whistleblower? And in my mind, he most likely fits the category of both.
Some observers point out that allies spying on allies is nothing new. It's always been a part of foreign affairs.
Neighbors have been spying on one another at least since Joshua sent those two guys down to Jericho, and they conducted their intelligence operations. It's not for nothing called the second oldest profession, espionage, and it will be around for a long time.
In some ways, they shouldn't have been surprised, because to the extent that we have intelligence sharing with those leaders, they must know the scope of our intelligence capabilities.
Internal U.S. State Department and military memos were made available to everyone from Vladimir Putin to Kim Jong-un and Iranian mullahs.
World leaders should expect that someone is listening. I think part of the challenge is they didn't think it was the United States. We are a country of great democratic values and believe in openness, and I think they were shocked to find out that we had done it.
I think a lot of the sort of shock to find out that the U.S. is spying, I do think that's a little disingenuous. At the same time, I think that this has supplanted drones, which supplanted Guantanamo, but it's all the same narrative. This sense of the U.S. overreach, a very, very bad taste in people's mouths around the world because of all of this.
Perhaps the most significant revelation of the Snowden leaks was the ineffectiveness of the checks and balances created to limit the NSA's activities.
The number of documents, the number of operations is so great that there's really no one who has oversight over this whole span. And the documents that I have that Snowden gave me get down to a level of nitty-gritty that in most cases the NSA director himself wouldn't need to know.
Lawyers and the government are going to have to reconcile people's common understanding of their communications and what's private with the technology we have today. Currently, the legal framework and the way that people communicate are not meshing.
And it's not just congressional oversight. There are also concerns over executive orders.
There's a presidential order called 12333 that authorizes NSA to do collection outside U.S. borders. Now, that was created at a time when the internet didn't exist.
People don't realize this, but when you send an email from Columbus to New York, there's a very high probability that there's a copy of that in Hong Kong, because Google and Yahoo and Microsoft are synchronizing their data centers, their servers that are all around the world. And so you can no longer say that it's a correct presumption, as the NSA would like to claim, that if you intercept content overseas, you can presume that they're foreigners. They're not. They're tens or hundreds of millions of Americans who are getting their communications intercepted that way.
And let me emphasize, the president and the NSA are doing this totally on their own. There's no law that authorizes this. Most members of Congress have no idea that it's happening. They don't get any warrants, and there's no court oversight.
The president can certainly change that, and it doesn't require congressional action to do so, but presidents are very careful in updating those kinds of authorities because you don't want unintended consequences.
Strategies by the U.S. and other governments to strike a balance between privacy and national security continue to evolve.
At what point do we push past that post-9/11 environment? And I think that's a lot of the tensions that are happening today. The things you were willing to do, the mentality that you had in 2001, is that something that you want to have in 2015, and 2020, and 2025? At what point do you change?
President Obama has the benefit of time to think about these programs, but also balance them against the risk of another terrorist attack.
Proposed new legislation, if passed, could strengthen the FISA court system.
There is a bill being considered in Congress right now. It's called the USA Freedom Act, and it would reform some of the authorities that authorize NSA activities.
It does make it clear that the government would no longer collect in bulk the phone records of these millions and millions of law-abiding Americans.
The bill would functionally end bulk collection of domestic metadata under Section 215 of the Patriot Act. So we think that would be a good first step if it stays strong, if it doesn't get watered down in negotiations.
We need to think about what kind of example we are going to set for future generations. The rules that we put in place now will have a huge impact on how all of those other governments eventually use this power.
Striking the right balance between advancing U.S. interests, protecting the American people from attack, and respecting their right to privacy will be an open-ended policy discussion for years to come.
Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by PricewaterhouseCoopers, LLP.